Well, hello, Man Up Charlotte, and welcome to this breakout session. Thank you for being here. We're excited to have you. My name is Ralph, and I'm going to be your moderator for this breakout session. Today, we're very honored and humbled to have with us a presenter who's going to be talking about something that I know is going to be impactful. But before we get to that, I want to encourage you to please fill out the question and answer area with any questions you might have for Jasper. And please know we've also given you the ability to ask those questions autonomously. So we know that this is a very sensitive area, and we want to give you the anonymity, if you will, of asking whatever question you want to ask. In addition to that, I'm going to be giving you some information on how you can get involved in the chat area. You'll be getting some links in that area, as well as some information on how you can get engaged. So please keep an eye out for that as well. But without further ado, I want to get right to our presenter. And again, very honored to have Jasper Hall, the president of Pure Hope, who leads a team while focusing on the operations, program strategy, and execution, internal and external, in the relationship building and growth. Jasper first came to Pure Hope as a longtime board member and chairman. And I can tell you, I have real good history with Jasper, and you are in for a real treat. I met him when he was a worship music director, and he was planting Transformation Church, which is led by Derwin Gray, whom you heard earlier in today's session. Jasper still lives in Charlotte with his wonderful wife of 2 decades, Sandy, and 3 awesome teen and college age children. He's active in the local community with a mission and a very passionate leader, a man who loves and cares well for his family and friends, and is an effective communicator of all things that bring joy and fulfillment. And with that, please welcome Jasper Hall.
Thanks so much, Ralph. Welcome, guys. So excited to be here. Wow, what a day we've had already with Man Up. Great, challenging, inspiring messages. I know I've been blessed tremendously by them. It's a privilege to come together in unity and in strength to dig in and really discover how can we all man up even more. That was a great introduction from Ralph. Sometimes you hear that thing about yourself or the things that he said and you go, wow, who's that guy? But it's only by God's grace, and I'm thankful for that. In how he has ordered my steps and planned the path. So I thank him for the grace and the love that abounds that he's given me. And I thank him for the joy that I have in serving him. My goal today and the role that I have really is to talk with you about pursuing purity and resisting temptation. Or as I say across the country a lot of times, is we get to talk about sex. And I think about what we've already heard today. I think about the conversation that Josh and Colin had with Bryce about the voices sometimes in our head, right? We're hearing all these things. How do we engage? How do we lean in? How do we connect, et cetera? And one of those voices could be, man, I'm coming from a place of brokenness. I don't feel worthy. I don't feel up to par. And this is one of those areas around purity. How do I feel about my life, my sexual behavior? And brothers, I have to tell you today, some of you maybe have already chosen to make Christ your savior today. Some of you may not have. But I want to encourage you that as we go through this brief time together, if you're a follower of Christ, this is a story of victory and hope. If you're not a follower of Christ, it's still a story of victory and hope. And so I encourage you to listen and see how it might resonate with you. And we'll cycle back and forth. I've got a couple of slides for you. But ultimately, I really want to be able to get to the core and the heart of solutions and how we can look at God's better story. So Pure Hope, my organization, Ralph mentioned, we talk every day all over the world about this issue of sexual brokenness. In fact, our vision is a world free of sexual brokenness. We believe it's the start, or where this thing starts is really in the heart of man, and not just man as in man, but mankind. We go all over the country and really in Charlotte as well, deeply talking about porn addiction. We talk about its impact on men, women, and children. We talk about this is a gateway issue that could lead to something as egregious as trafficking. The stats are overwhelming. When Ralph and I were prepping and talking, we're like, well, I could put a slide up and give you a lot of the stats and sort of scare you. But the reality is I want to talk more about hope today, more about solutions that I know God has provided through Jesus. But I will get you to think and really marinate, as Pastor Derwin often says, on this idea of 90%, and actually today over 90% of boys and even now girls actually access porn for the first time at the age of 8. Now just let that sit there for a second. Years ago, the age was 13. Parents ask us all across the country, well, when should I start talking about sex? Blah, 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 blah. The challenge is not when should we start, because we know from our own stories and journeys, man, that it's when does that older sibling start talking about it? When can I Google and ask a question because I want to know what this thing is about, and boom, the images start showing up. And then those images are with you forever. And so our challenge here as we think about preparing ourselves for things like serving and signing up to mentor and work with children that are fatherless, those voices, those noises sometimes are the ones that are saying to us, well, how can you provide any help? You're still broken yourself. Again, another Pastor Derwinism, he often says, God, we're all tore up from the floor up. And so that brokenness is truly what drives our ability to either experience freedom or not experience freedom, as it were. So again, our vision is a world free of sexual brokenness. It's lofty, and we know that we're not going to achieve that goal in our time here on earth. But we work towards that goal, telling God's better story of hope and redemption, knowing that that transformation causes the ability for us to work towards the vision of a world free, even though we may not arrive there. Now, we move towards that vision by our message, which simply says we equip men and women to pursue purity through relationship with Jesus. And that's where this conversation starts. It sort of informs this conversation of, pursuing purity, resisting temptation, because that can seem hopeless when you're in addiction. Or you could be in a place where you're like, yeah, that's not really my struggle. I mean, I get it. I know it's out there. I'm sure other people do. To that, we say, either we may not be honest with ourselves, maybe we're not human, or maybe we're just in denial because our brokenness is an all of us problem. We want to be in a place where fathers can lead sons and they can lead daughters, and pastors can lead churches and communities, and then coaches and mentors can lead people of their sphere and their influence. So we into this next slide, we like to start this whole conversation with what does the Bible say about this issue? And that is actually in our founding phrase of our name, Pure Hope. We found this verse in 1 John 3:3. It literally confounds me in that this seems too simple. It says, and everyone who has this hope fixed on him purifies himself just as he is pure. That seems too simple. I'm going to read that again because it's powerful. And everyone who has this hope fixed on him purifies himself as he is pure. Men, simply that means Jesus is our hope. He is our pure hope. And again, that's what our ministry focuses on. Now, what that verse doesn't say is you should purify yourself. It implies that you will as a natural outcome of fixing your hope on him. I'm going to unpack that a little bit more later because, again, we're just getting the concepts of how do we remove those voices and how do we trust and believe, no matter what our state of brokenness is, in God to redeem and reconcile us. So when we as God's children understand that purity is not a state of being, it's not that I can say, man, I checked all the boxes, I haven't had sex before marriage, I'm not committing adultery, etc. And that may or may not be our story today. But it's a state of becoming more and more intimate with Jesus who sustains us. Then we experience victory at that point. So what about this whole narrative of resisting temptation, right? James chapter 4, verse 7 says, submit yourselves to God, resist the evil one, and he will flee from you. I'm one of these guys that walks into a room, and often I'll say I'm the social sponge. Like, what is the tone? What's the feeling? What's going on in here, et cetera. And so when I throw a question out there like that, what does it look like practically? What I feel like if I'm sitting there listening to this is I'm going, well, what if I'm trying to teach my son or daughter this in theory about purity and with all the social pressures and technology and the challenges with media, et cetera? Or in fact, what if, as we've talked about today, fatherlessness, what if today I haven't had that influence of a father or a mentor or a leader that has actually explained to me God's better stories and principles of purity and sex? It becomes a much bigger challenge. So I think to effectively respond to this, I submit to you that we must understand God's better story of sex, because we do have the better story. It's compelling, it's powerful, and sadly missed completely by many well-meaning and even believers in our context. The problem is there's narrow concepts such as abstinence. Let's not ever have sex before marriage. While that's good and it's well-meaning, it's actually righteous. It doesn't provide a solution for those of us who, quite frankly, have already missed that boat. And that's the vast majority, unfortunately, in our context and culture today. Or we simply have developed sort of this tolerance idea and a belief system that allows us to compromise based on the standards of the world and in the excuse of behavior that ultimately leads to even more brokenness. Again, God has a good design and intention for his people. And we should steward our sexuality as a gift. One key element of this, in our next slide, it says, on the first page of the Bible, Genesis 1, our identities are as male and female image bearers. In other words, sex is about identity before activity. Identity as a male and a female. And our maleness is what we're talking about today, guys. Not the act of, or the many descriptions therein that exist in our culture today. What do you identify as? What's your gender, so on and so forth. And that's not to be crass. It's not to be insensitive. The truth of the matter is, up until the 1920s, the word sex was always a reference only about our male and femaleness. In fact, if you look at a birth certificate or any official form or document around who you are, your driver's license, etc., when you see the word sex, the question isn't have you or have you not. The question is the answer is M or F, male or female. So that's fundamentally telling that story. So after the Roaring 20s, what happened culturally is we said, well, free sex, I want to have a revolution. Sex represented activity, power, dominion, control. And therefore, it more became culturally about activity. And that's the challenge. We believe if we can point our hearts back to Jesus as our identity is in him, as male and female, as kings and priests, as lovers of God, and as Christ as the bridegroom of the church, his bride, that is the start of a victorious story of God's better story. So our sexual stewardship as men, and as in many cases our wives, our sisters, our girlfriends, whatever the case may be, if we're single, as boys and girls, when we abstain from sexual activity outside of a godly union, it reflects patience, it reflects diligence, active waiting, just as the church today awaits Christ's return. And guys, that seems like a lot. In fact, I'm processing and listening to this as I talk, and I'm going, man, that's a really lofty view, right? How can I ever really achieve that? Well, I take you back to the verse in 1 John 3:3. Everyone who has this hope fixed on him purifies himself just as he is pure. So we don't have to do it. It's not on us. Remember, guys, this is a foundation of how we can resist temptation and pursue purity. Derwin also says this thing, it's not the don't message, right? That abstinence conversation, because many of us have blown it. And the truth is we may blow it again. So that leads us to sort of this next core principle Um, and that is, and this is one of my favorites, this resonates with people really everywhere that we go that we talk about it, is purity is a relationship, not an accomplishment. It's a relationship, not an accomplishment. If you really let that marinate and settle in your mind, I don't have to focus on checking the boxes that I've been pure. I have to focus on relationship with Jesus. This is the roadmap to this pursuit and how we can resist. The evil one lies to us. The enemy lies to us. However you refer to that, the devil, the evil one, the enemy, he lies to us that purity is an accomplishment. It's some moral achievement. Hey, I made it to my wedding night as a virgin. It's our worthiness is based on our performance. When scripture shows us clearly that Jesus has come to purify a people for himself for for the very reason that we could not purify ourselves. It talks about that in Titus chapter 2, verse 14. So the truth is temptation will only come, the truth is temptation will come always and in various waves and ways. God knows us, he made us. He knows our desires. He knows that he made a woman beautiful for that reason. But the bottom line here, man, is that grace is sufficient. As we pursue him, he pursues us. We can remain pure because we're in a relationship with Jesus. The grace is not a license to sin, but it's a challenge and a call for us to stand up as men, husbands, fathers, leaders, kings and priests, as I said earlier, in the truth of the gospel and lead our sons, daughters, wives, friends, and colleagues, and the world to be free of sexual brokenness. And very briefly, as we wrap up our time, and this is just such a privilege, one tool, one resource that we like to provide, we call it the Pure Loop. It's an acronym for us. And there's a slide there that just shows you just sort of this, and it's actually the Pure Hope logo as well. It literally unpacks a model for us to marinate on every day when we find ourselves tempted, when we find ourselves struggling. You can see in the slide that it starts with prayer at the top. And then it leads to understanding and resolve and then engagement. So we cultivate intimacy and honesty with our Father through prayer. And then accountability with others and in community. That's what we've talked about today. How do I engage? How do I get involved in community? How do we pray together? How do we lead one another? How do we lead when we're weak? Jonathan and Mike talked about that. When I'm having a bad day, I'm struggling, I'm jumping on the phone, talking to a friend, etc. This loop is that reminder of prayer and understanding and resolving and engagement. Understanding strengthens our resolve and commitment to God in our daily decisions that we make. And I'll give you a practical tool for me, again, as we wrap this up. I find that I operate inside my head a lot. And so this idea of being tempted and struggling, I have to sometimes preach to myself. If that thing that's going to mislead me to struggle or have these the unholy thoughts, if you will, I literally just say, Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. In this moment, Jesus, clear my heart, clear my mind. And in those moments, it's very difficult for sin to occupy that space where I'm calling Jesus and leaning into him. So I just encourage you guys deeply as we flow into that. And honestly, if you get nothing else from our time together today, our brief time talking, obviously I want you to look more into Pure Hope and what our ministry is about, because we're about providing these solutions to Christian men who want to go deeper. But the big takeaway today, the call to action, men, is what story are you telling with your life? What story are you telling with your life? Both the one that everyone sees and the one behind the mask of hurt, guilt, and shame. And now I'm going to pass it back over to Ralph. In fact, let me just say this. Reminder, we have the better story. So I'm going to pass it to Ralph and see if we have any Q&A that we want to actually delve into.
Well, thank you so much, Jasper. And this is such a powerful subject. When I think about men, I think about fatherlessness. I think about education. And then I think about that third pillar, and that is lust and pornography. And man, I'm so proud of you for being here, and proud of you, Jasper, for what you're doing in this ministry. We do have some questions. The first question and I love how he says it here. He says, I'll put it out there even before we start. So he started before you did. He said, please help address the areas of how to handle the enemy of lust for women inside marriage and being single. It distracts and pummels my mind daily.
Yes, yes. That's huge. I mean, that is absolutely huge. And thank you for the question. What I will say, and I said it there at the end as far as a little personal tool that I use, that is our reality. That is a result of the fall. That's a result of us understanding that we are human in this context, in this imperfect flesh, and we're a product of a dying world. But honestly, this is a guttural response. This is I'm broken. This is going to constantly be challenging for me. So every moment, the Bible says, pull all those thoughts into captivity. And what you have to do is make that decision, whether it's accountability with another brother, whether it's just you yourself preaching to yourself, or finding community in a small group and saying, guys, I need somebody to call. If I'm having this moment, who's that 3 a.m. friend that I'm saying, man, I'm struggling with this? And quite frankly, it can be even more challenging in the context of marriage than our singleness, because you're being held to a certain standard. So the guilt and shame is so much greater. Whether that's real or, whether that's reality or not, that's the way that we feel. So I would practice preaching to yourself. It'll seem hokey when you first start it, but then you get into that narrative every day of on a walk, on a talk, on a whatever. It's the conversation with God daily.
No, amen, brother. Yeah, I can tell you, you are the average of the 5 people you hang around, and there's nothing you can do about it. And that includes yourself.
That's right. That's right.
Unfortunately, we have time for just one more question. And I knew when we did these 30-minute sessions, this was going to happen. So please, I put in the chat area how you can reach out. Fill out that form. You can get connected with Jasper and Pure Hope, and I would encourage you to do that. But the next question is, and I love again how this is written, Jasper, you don't understand. This is all great, but I've blown it. I've slept around while married and single. I'm addicted to porn right now. I just binged last night or this morning before this event. Its grip on me is significant. How do I resist and pursue purity?
Well, that is so rich, because I think that probably reflects most of us, whether our addiction is in the sexual area or whether there's other things that we struggle with. There's many things out there. But this is a huge way. Honestly, this event could be a start for many of us. It could kick off an opportunity in community to reach out. I've already talked about the self-preach, and that's a big thing, and that may not be your style, but if you can get in community, I mean, if it's at an epidemic proportion for you, the reality is, I think we have to address that at a high level. There's ministries at churches like Celebrate Recovery that man up, and all the leadership here would be able to assist and get you plugged into. But finding a mentor, finding another man, finding a peer where you can lay your heart out and say, I'm really struggling with this. There's no shame. There is no punitive response at this point in time, because you're giving it to Jesus, and you're turning your eyes to Jesus. And at the end of the day, the struggle is great, and many of us have it, but it's not too late. I say this all the time. Unless you plan on dying tomorrow, it's not too late, and you've not gone too far, and so far that God can't forgive, He can't cleanse, and He can't restore.
Thank you. And with that, we will close the session. I do have a short video that I'm going to show for the men for a call to action that I would love for you guys to stay and watch. But Jasper, I want to say thank you. Thank you for all that you do. Thank you for Pure Hope. I just pray blessings on you, and peace and joy and wisdom. And I look forward to seeing you and hearing you again in the very, very near future.
Awesome. Thanks, Ralph. And thanks so much, guys.
God bless.
Blessings.
All right, man. Can you feel the momentum? It's been awesome here at Man Up Charlotte, but we want to keep it going. This is a one-day conference, but the work each of us is going to do moving forward will continue. But it's going to require each of us taking the necessary steps for unified action. And so we've got to link arms together, and we've got to figure out what we personally can do. And then we've got to encourage and motivate one another to go and do it. And so we're here for you here at Man Up Charlotte. You are now part of the community. We thank you for participating in the conference, but we want to stay connected with you moving forward. And so the first step, in what ways do you want to help reach the fatherless? Now, we've got 2 ministry partners that we're already connected with, and that's the Harvest Center and Neighborhood Hope. So you've got the link. So be sure to fill out that link and let us know which organization you'd like to take the next steps with. And then also, if you're interested in connecting with other men in Charlotte to grow in your faith, to start exploring some of the topics that we've discussed and heard about today, we'd love to connect you with Unpacking It, the ministry that I'm a part of. And so you can fill out that link and reach out to me. We'd love to hear from you. And then also you can connect with CBMC. So be sure to fill out that survey. And so if you want to connect with sports fans or if you want to connect with other businessmen, you can do that through CBMC. And if you want to connect with kind of the overall Man Up community, you can do that as well. Just indicate that on the survey. So click that link and we'll be able to point you in the right direction. So each of us, it's our responsibility to man up, to maximize the impact that we can have in our homes, in our communities, and in our city here in the great city of Charlotte. And so stay connected with us on social media. Just search at ManUpQC. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. So we'll see you there. And Lord willing, we'll see you next year as well for Man Up 2021. Be thinking about who you're going to invite, and we'll get the men of Charlotte back together again. And in the meantime, let's take unified action to man up here in Charlotte. Thanks, men.